Hi, I'm Stacy Brown with CPPS, and I would like to take a moment to discuss some behaviors of concern when recognizing insider threats. It's important to understand that we all have an active role in our organizations regarding recognizing insider threats and mitigating the risks we might face. While there is no profile of an insider threat, there are certain principles to be aware of, and certain individuals are more likely to pose threats. So paying attention to a person's behaviors, stressors, predispositions, and background are key factors in recognizing insider threats. Also, understanding that behavior is what matters most, not necessarily the motivation. And certain environments are more likely to facilitate insider threat behavior, such as high stress or high demand, maybe negative environments. But the transformation of a person moving from a trusted insider to an insider threat is really a process. There are common indicators that can be observed and mitigated. People don't just snap, they decide. And the good news for us is they leave warning signs behind for us to pick up on. This is why we become the most important resource as long as we're paying attention, tuning into that situational awareness, observing others' behaviors, listening to that intuition, and acting upon it should something maybe not feel right or seem right. Oftentimes, when an act is committed, others report noticing indicators. So what are those indicators and what should we be looking for? Well, really, it's understanding that there is a progression. It's a 6-step progression that a person with bad intentions will go through. And it usually begins with a grievance. So usually something takes place where someone feels slighted, or maybe for whatever reason they just can't move past it. They then move into exploring maybe acts of violence or sabotage, and that begins the next phase, which is preparation. They conduct research and develop a plan, gather materials that could help them carry out this plan. Now, with cyber attacks specifically, maybe they start stealing passwords or obtaining privileges they shouldn't have. In violent attacks, maybe they start acquiring firearms, ammunition, explosives. And while most individuals, they don't advance past this phase because they're afraid of retaliation, or maybe someone has noticed some warning signs and so proper intervention has taken place, it's important to understand that if someone does move past this phase, there's usually a trigger point that has taken place. And usually that trigger point is outside of somebody's control. So it could be a financial stressor, or maybe threats of being laid off or terminated. Or maybe they try to address these grievances and they were dismissed by the organization. This is usually when they'll become, or they'll move into trying to recruit others for assistance maybe, or they begin looking at weaknesses in security, for example. And then they move into phase 4, experimentation. They begin surveillance, testing, maybe even rehearsing their plan. They begin to push electronic boundaries or accessing an area where they don't normally work or should be accessing at all. And then they move into phase 5, execution. If this plan isn't disrupted, then the person can steal information, sabotage cybersecurity, equipment, or commit violent acts against others. Then the last phase is escape. They look for ways to evade detection. Maybe they start to blame others or alter records. If the act is violent, the person might commit suicide afterwards, or maybe suicide by cop. But they focus on publicizing the act by broadcasting stolen data, information, or intellectual property. While the act has already been carried out, the effects last a long time, especially if they remain in place. So it's really important to use your situational awareness and pay attention to these signs. Once you observe an individual is moving down the pathway, they're a lot more likely to actually carry out this plan. So intervention here is key. Often those who steal data or secrets, they leak their plans or grievances to others before acting. Surprisingly, in over a third of those cases, they actually discuss and communicate with others details of those plans specifically. In violent attacks, researchers say that 85% of the attackers, they actually made concerning comments regarding past historical events, violent events, racist or misogynistic comments. They look to purchase weapons, guns, aspirations to commit future violence in general are all things that you're going to pay attention to. Now, two important qualities to be aware of when observing human behavior is first and foremost, listen through their frame of reference, not yours. So really try to put yourself in their shoes, see it through their point of view, so that way you could recognize if these behaviors are concerning. And listen with your eyes. Pay attention to their nonverbals. A person's behavior could be a key indicator that they are headed down a bad path, or maybe they're just making a plea for help. Either which way, we want to tune into that so we can intervene appropriately. So specifically, what kind of behaviors are we looking for? Well, usually they'll come out in some kind of intimidation, harassment, bullying, especially stalking, maybe just threats of violence, an unwillingness to comply with organizational policy or standards, rules, excessive overtime, or working odd or late hours out of the norm, maybe financial difficulties or unexplained financial gains. And while it's important to recognize these behaviors of concern, it's also important to know that there's a difference between somebody just having a bad day versus posing a real threat. The key here is a change in their behavior. So when these behaviors begin to cluster and we recognize that maybe they're having a change in attitude, appearance, or even work performance, these are the things we want to pay attention to. The key is to recognizing these behaviors so we can report them accordingly, therefore preventing an act from taking place. And not everyone who makes a threat will pose a threat. So make sure you're paying attention to these warning signs and understanding if they're trends or just somebody having a bad day. Thank you.